Today's number 3 most urgent vulnerability is CVE 2026-9198 in Langflow, and it earns that rank for a very simple reason. This is a critical, unauthenticated path to remote code execution, and it is already on CISA's known exploited vulnerabilities catalog. In other words, this is not just a high theoretical score sitting in a scanner report, it has real exploitation signal behind it. This is the Daily Ranked CVE Brief, What to Patch First, ranked by real exploitation signal from CISA KEV, First EPSS, and CVSS, every day. If you run Langflow, especially a default or network-reachable deployment, this is the kind of issue that can move from exposure to full system impact very quickly. CVE 2026-9198 affects IBM Langflow OSS, identified here as Langflow/Langflow. The official NVD description says IBM Langflow OSS versions 1.0.0 through 1.10.0 allow unauthenticated attackers to chain an auto-login API behavior with a code validation API behavior to achieve full remote code execution on default Langflow deployments. The weakness category is CVE-94, which is improper control of generation of code, or code injection. In plain English, the application is allowing user-controlled input to cross a boundary where it can become executable code. That is dangerous in almost any software, but it is especially dangerous in a server-side application exposed over the network. Verdict: this is an emergency patch candidate because the score reflects remote, unauthenticated, full-impact compromise. The CVSS score is 9.8 critical. The two metrics that matter most are the access requirements and the impact. First, the vector is network reachable, with low attack complexity, no privileges required, and no user interaction required. That means an attacker does not need a stolen account, and they do not need to trick an administrator into clicking something. Second, confidentiality, integrity, and availability are all rated high. So the concern is not just data exposure. It is also the ability to change systems, disrupt service, and execute code in the environment where Langflow is running. The reason this lands so high on today's ranked list is the real-world exploitation signal. CISA KEV status is true, which means this CVE appears in the known exploited vulnerabilities catalog. That is a major prioritization signal for defenders, because KEV entries are used to distinguish vulnerabilities that are already being exploited from vulnerabilities that are merely plausible. The EPSS percentile is 0.96771, meaning it ranks higher than roughly 96.8% of vulnerabilities in the EPSS model's likelihood ordering. A percentile is not a guarantee that your specific instance is being targeted, but combined with KEV and a 9.8 CVSS score, it strongly argues against waiting for the next normal maintenance window. Defensively, the attack path is important to understand without turning this into a how-to. The NVD description identifies two relevant API behaviors. One involves an auto-login endpoint that can mint superuser tokens to a network caller. The other involves a code validation endpoint that executes user code through exec. Chained together, those behaviors create a path from unauthenticated network access to privileged application control, and then to code execution. The key exposure question is whether an attacker can reach the Langflow service at all. If the application is internet-facing, reachable from broad internal networks, or sitting behind weak perimeter controls, the reachable attack surface is much larger. Default deployments are specifically called out in the description, so do not assume this requires an unusual configuration. To check exposure, start with asset discovery. Find every Langflow deployment your organization runs: production, lab, developer, internal automation, and forgotten test systems. Then verify the exact version and compare it with the vendor advisory. The NVD description names IBM Langflow OSS 1.0.0 through 1.10.0, but defenders should still use the official vendor guidance as the source of truth for affected and fixed status. Next, map reachability. Is this service exposed to the internet? Is it reachable from VPN users, shared engineering networks, CI systems, or cloud subnets? Finally, confirm whether default deployment assumptions apply. For this CVE, exposure is not only about having the package installed, it is about whether the vulnerable service can be reached by an unauthenticated network caller. The primary action is to apply the vendor-provided remediation for affected Langflow deployments as soon as possible. If you cannot patch immediately, reduce exposure while you prepare the change. Put the service behind strict network controls, remove unnecessary internet access, and limit access to known administrative or application networks. Because the issue involves super-user token minting, treat exposed instances as potentially compromised until reviewed. Rotate or revoke privileged tokens where applicable, review accounts and access paths, and look for unexpected configuration changes. For systems that were reachable before remediation, perform host-level review as well, because the described impact is remote code execution. Patching stops the known vulnerability. Investigation helps answer whether anything already happened. For detection, focus on behavior that should be rare or tightly controlled. Review application and reverse proxy logs for traffic to the auto-login and code validation API paths named in the NVD description, especially from unknown sources or unauthenticated contexts. Look for unexpected creation or use of super-user-level tokens, unusual administrative activity, or configuration changes that do not map to a known operator action. Code validation activity should have a clear business reason and a recognizable source. Bursts, odd timing, or internet origin requests deserve attention. At the host level, monitor for suspicious child processes, file changes, or outbound connections from the Langflow environment. Normal should be predictable. Known users, known networks, expected workflows. Anything outside that baseline is worth triage. Bottom line, CVE 2026-9198 is today's number 3 priority because it combines the worst defensive ingredients: unauthenticated network reachability, critical remote code execution impact, a 9.8 CVSS score, high EPSS percentile, and CSIC KEV status. If Langflow is in your environment, identify it, verify versions against the vendor advisory, restrict access, patch, rotate privileged tokens, and investigate exposed systems. That is exactly what the Daily Ranked CVE Brief is here for. What to patch first, ranked by real exploitation signal, every day. Subscribe for the next ranked breakdown, and check the full ranked report linked in the description.